5 Live Formula One.
Welcome to the Chequered Flag podcast. You join us at the end of a thrilling race. I think everyone enjoyed it. I'm Jenny Gow, alongside me, Harry Benjamin, our lead F1 commentator, and Mark Priestley, former McLaren mechanic and author, broadcaster. I don't know when to end the superlatives or how amazing you are, but the race was amazing. Won by Charles Leclerc for Ferrari. We're just getting ready for the celebrations in the background. You might be able to hear champagne corks popping off, cameras, and that is Charles Leclerc just coming in. He won the race ahead of his teammate Carlos Sainz, and in third place it was Max Verstappen, although a controversial ending with Norris being penalised and having to give the place back to Max Verstappen. Charles Leclerc just surrounded by the Ferrari engineers, mechanics, the whole team embracing him, and all the photographers to the left-hand side. Harry, this is a moment in history for Ferrari, for Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. It's brilliant.
First 1-2 for Ferrari in the US since Indianapolis back in 2006, so about 18 years ago. So it is a momentous occasion for the Scuderia on home soil. Listen to that. The champagne is flowing. Fred Vasseur is being absolutely drenched, and he's drenching the entire team. And the world's media, I suppose that includes us, are surrounding them and looking on. And me, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz smiling from ear to ear as well. A well-earned win and a well-celebrated one.
I mean, this is the party is kicked off. Forget about downtown Austin. This is where it's at. Mark, how much does this mean to the team? What are these moments like?
Yeah, amazing scenes, and it will mean a huge amount, not only for today and for all the people that are here, but of course all those people back in Maranello, a whole town in Italy, and even a country that gets behind this team. But importantly, the result today has also really brought them back into contention in the Constructors' Championship, and that is a big deal.
I think that's why it means so much. It's a 1-2 for them, but as you say, it brings them back into the fight. And can you imagine Ferrari fighting for a title? That's what people want to see. That's what people are drawn to F1 for.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a massive roar just then, so forgive me, Mark, if you just said this and I didn't hear you. But 8 points now split Ferrari and Red Bull, who are second in the Constructors' Championship.
No, I didn't.
It's one way of getting around that, isn't it? But that is mighty. At first, we were all talking about how McLaren are closing on Red Bull, and then they leapfrogged them. And almost kind of quietly, Ferrari have just gone about their business a little bit under the radar. We've been distracted by the Drivers' Championship battle, and now they are firmly in the hunt, if not second. McLaren are not too far up the road either, and I'm actually going to be disappointed when this driver lineup comes to an end at the end of the year. I know obviously Lewis Hamilton is Lewis Hamilton, but we've got Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. I just think they make such a good team working together.
I couldn't agree more. I'm sure we'll talk about Lewis Hamilton in a moment, but Carlos Sainz, coming towards the end of his Ferrari career, is desperate for at least one more win, because it could be a couple of years or even longer before he gets the opportunity again. And it was so close for him. I mean, Charles Leclerc drove a wonderful race, but Carlos Sainz did a brilliant job to back him up today, and for a team, it really is the perfect outcome.
Harry, debrief us, debrief the listeners at home. Tell us how Leclerc managed to win that race.
Well, it's actually quite easy. He did it on lap 1, turn 1. They got brilliant launches. We said yesterday, look out the Ferraris on the second row, because the nature of that run up the hill to turn 1 here in Austin is you can take so many different lines. It does concertina up at the apex, but going into it, Leclerc and Sainz made use of Lando Norris and Max Verstappen basically squabbling and taking each other off the road. That left the door nice and open for Charles Leclerc, and from there he never looked back.
No, that's right. He drove a really controlled race after that. But I think that would have always been, at least to some extent, part of the strategy. Fred Vasseur is tipping champagne off the balcony above us on top of anyone who happens to be underneath it. These are wonderful scenes, they really are. It's been some time, as you said, Harry, a very, very long time, in fact, especially here in the States, since this team has been able to celebrate a 1-2 in front of an American crowd, and they are really making the most of it.
Do you know what? I think we need to hear from our winner. He'll tell us it was a boring race. He'll tell us he didn't care. This is Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, lap 1 was really good. Really, really good. I mean, I was super happy to have had such a good start. I was alongside Carlos. I knew that the two guys in front will go very aggressive into turn one, and that's exactly what happened. I prepared my exit, which was a winning bet because I could have a very good exit and overtake both of them. And then from that moment onwards, I knew that I just had to take care of my tires and go to the end, and that's what we did. We just had a really, really good pace today. So it was a little bit of a lonely race, but it's a good kind of lonely, and I hope there are many other races that feels lonely and we win like that.
Yeah, you'll take that. I did hear you on the radio saying you didn't want to be under pressure and for them to pick you up earlier. How much pressure is there when you're in that situation? You said it was a lonely race, but you're just alone in the car thinking of what could happen to make you lose a race in that position. So just talk us through it.
No, the only thing I was warning the team with is that obviously when you get out of cold tires, you don't want to have a car like a second behind, because it's super important to do a good job in the first few laps of every stint. So I didn't want to wait too much. Anyway, Max and Carlos had already pitted, so there wasn't much for me to gain by going still longer, apart from them coming back with fresher tires and me going out with a lot less gap. And then it would have been a bit trickier with the colder tires, and I just wanted to have my time to bring the tires to temperature the way I wanted, so I just made sure that they understood my point. But there was no problems because the gap was plenty.
Game on in the championship as well.
Constructors for sure, drivers we need a bit of luck, but I'll never stop dreaming until it's done.
So with the smell of champagne still fresh in our nostrils and Ferrari's nostrils, I mean, it was boring for Charles Leclerc, but he'll take that time and time again if it means that he can close that gap between the other drivers and he can win races.
Yeah, although there was a little bit of concern in Charles Leclerc's voice in the early stages of the race. We talk about plans A, B and C, and he was very much wanting for whatever their plan C was and not wanting to be left out too long. Carlos Sainz was going for a bit of an undercut on Max Verstappen. That made it work. And then there was actually almost a little bit of a danger that if they didn't act with Leclerc, Sainz could have been actually leapfrogging his teammate. But it did work out for Ferrari on that front in the end. But, the strategy actually so far this weekend for Ferrari has been pretty top notch.
I'd say they got it about right, didn't they? It was a race that we kind of at the beginning we thought it was going to shift more towards a two-stop. The temperatures were quite high, that would have perhaps favoured a two-stop, but actually degradation was lower than expected, particularly with the Ferraris and Leclerc out front with a clear track in front of him. He was able to look after his tyres and deliver pace, and it meant that the one-stop strategy ended up being the fastest one from lights out to checkered flag, and it kind of did it perfectly. I don't think there's anything we can really criticise Ferrari for at all today.
Right, let's hear from our second place man. It's Carlos Sainz.
Yeah, first of all, congrats to the team and to Charles for a great day in general. I think 1-2 is always a massive day for Ferrari, and everyone will be extremely happy, including me. At the same time, obviously, there's this feeling of being super quick all weekend and very fast. Probably the fastest on race day, and the feeling of what it could have been, with a bit luckier start, in a bit better position at the start to get that P1 like Charles did and dominate from then onwards. Hopeful that the rest of the year we get more chances like this, because I would like to win another race before leaving.
Was there more in there for you out there on track? I mean, we spoke yesterday about having to not fight each other maybe as well as you did in the sprint race. Did you have to hold position today?
No, I was never behind Charles, to be honest, to be able to fight with him. We had Max in between in the first stint, and I had a problem with the power unit at some stage, and I lost the DRS and the opportunity to...
It sounded like you were smelling something that wasn't very nice.
Lost the opportunity to stay within reach of Charles there by not passing Max in the first stint, and then from then onwards, really, even though I was really quick at the second stint with hard tires, even if I was the first one to box into hards, I was still very quick, and at the end I just had to control the pace. I had to save quite a bit of fuel and make it to the end.
So you can tell Carlos is slightly annoyed then, isn't he? Because he knows he was the faster driver all weekend, but the start was critical, and actually it was Leclerc that got out there in front.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been pretty nip and tuck, to be honest, between Leclerc and Sainz. Sainz has been strong, absolutely, qualified ahead of Charles Leclerc. But I think this is still a strong result. I'm not sure Sainz could do any more. We've got to remember that he did have some sort of issue in the opening part of the lap. He was talking about on the radio smelling fuel, which often Mark is not a good sign, and they could see it on the engineering
on the
board as well.
Yeah.
And trying to get him to manage it, it seemed to kind of resolve itself.
Well, they did make a switch position change. The smelling of the fuel was an odd one. I never really got my head around exactly what that would have been. But actually the other issue was he was getting issues in trying to deliver the power out of the slow corners. That's where he was being hurt. It was costing him lap time. He kept referring to it throughout the race. And in the end, they did make a switch position on the steering wheel, which seemed like it fixed the issue, and they got the thing back under control. And then he was able to settle into a really good race. But actually, crucially, it was the start of that opening lap, that start first of turn one, I should say. It was turn one where the battle between the two title protagonists happened. And when it all opened out, it was Leclerc that had the clear gap in front of him. Carlos Sainz was a little bit blocked. So it's kind of just bad luck that it ended up that way round for the two Ferraris. Bad luck for Sainz at least. Great luck for Charles Leclerc.
We've moved down the paddock now slightly because it was all getting a bit hectic. You move your fan club in, Mark, so we've moved away. And we do now need to talk about, I suppose, what was slightly controversial. Max Verstappen finished in third place. Let's have a listen to what he has to say.
Yeah, just not the pace like we had the last 2 days for whatever reason. Braking was difficult, turning was difficult, and we weren't as good as the others on the tires, and we paid the price for that. So I couldn't really fight the Ferraris, and also the McLarens were faster today. But I think as a team we did everything we could, and I tried to of course defend as well as I could.
I mean, there was some great racing out there. It was a dream watching you and Lando battle it out, but obviously the battle spilled out to off track. Just tell me how you called it in the car, because obviously your impressions are quite different from what we get to see.
Well, I think all the racing was very good. I think Lando will probably say the same. You know, we had hard-fought battles, but everything was fair. We gave each other space. But then, of course, in turn 12, we both ran wide, but the ruling is you cannot overtake, of course, outside the track. I mean, I've been done for it also here in Austin in 17. The move feels great, but the rules are the rules. You cannot overtake outside the wide line, and that's how it is.
It was a slam dunk, really. Were you surprised that he didn't give that place back and try again?
I thought it was at the time it was for track limits, the total of 4. But I was also fighting my car at the same time, so it was more just focusing on trying to get the best out of the car till the end.
Extend your lead though this weekend, so not too bad.
That's a positive, yeah.
So we need to talk about what is a fairly controversial subject up and down the paddock. It was Max Verstappen that finished in third place, got the last spot on the podium ahead of Lando Norris. And Harry, it all played out in the final moments on track, didn't it, really?
Yeah, it was. They were having a brilliant battle for that final podium place, which seemed to be going on and on and on. Norris just closing. And I suppose maybe we should have seen it coming, because we've seen these incidents happen in the early part of the race. So that left-hander where it's almost like a double left apex, and it really concertinas up into that left-hander of turn 15, very much like that Bahrain turn 10, where Lando Norris was then going around the outside, almost equal going into the corner, it seems, to the naked eye. Verstappen at the inside, and then Verstappen, well, he didn't really make the corner. He went off the track, and that meant Norris had nowhere to go either. There's a lot of runoff there. Norris taking all the way to it, driving off the track, all four wheels well and truly off the line, and rejoined the track ahead of Lando Norris. He left the track. He gained an advantage. That was investigated, and then it was decided that Lando Norris would be given a 5-second time penalty. So while Norris finished third on the road, quick swap around, and Verstappen was back in front once the penalty applied.
Yeah, and you can take it right back to that opening corner between those two, can't you? Because there was that battle between those two drivers in turn 1 on lap 1 that opened the door for Charles Leclerc. But at that point, there was a question whether did Max Verstappen push Lando Norris off the track at that moment. Same sort of thing, there was no penalty, but it was lap 1. There's often a little bit more leniency given in those moments, in those incidents. Later on in the race, the one you're talking about 4 laps from the end, there are kind of two sides to this, right? There's the idea of, did Max Verstappen push Lando Norris off the racetrack? And yes, he's very aggressive. We've seen him do it over and over again. He just opens up the steering a little bit, runs you out wide. I think that was sort of borderline. I think it was kind of okay. But then what happened, as you said, there is no question about the fact that Lando Norris overtook Max Verstappen outside of the track limits, and that's a slam dunk penalty. It's not even subjective, is it?
Well, let's hear from Lando Norris.
I feel all right. Of course, not my best race again. With the loss in turn one and just the racing at the end, clearly wasn't enough. So that's life. Didn't do a good enough job. But I gave it a good shot. So I'm doing my best. If my best isn't good enough sometimes, then that's just the case. That's life. But I gave it a good shot. It just wasn't our day today.
Obviously, you seem quite flat. That's to be expected. Are you going to speak to the stewards? Do you agree with what they're saying? Because it is a controversial issue.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a talk. I feel like there's plenty of scenarios where people wouldn't get a penalty in the case of what happened.
Do you wish you'd given the place back?
It's tough to know. Maybe that was my one opportunity that I had. Max was defending well and was not easy to overtake.
So obviously tempers are quite high after the race, adrenaline's kicking around, but these two guys are friends. They're friends off the track. When it comes to being on the track, there's slightly more animosity there, but actually I genuinely feel that both of them want to understand the other person's opinion and how it unfolded, but it all comes down to the rules, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's almost two elements to judge here. As I said, I think one is the overtaking off track, and that's not really, doesn't need any judgment because he did absolutely overtake him whilst off the racetrack. There's a 5-second penalty, which is a slam dunk every single time that comes for that offence. The other side of this is how much was he pushed off the track? Was the only reason that he overtook Max Verstappen off the racetrack because Max Verstappen pushed him off the racetrack? And that will be the argument that McLaren will have all day long. So it was one of those fine margins. In the race commentary, I called it and I said, I thought that was a fair penalty because ultimately you cannot overtake another car off the racetrack, and that's what he did.
Okay, but devil's advocate,
Here we
he
go.
was forced off the track by
Yep.
Max Verstappen, left nowhere to go was Lando Norris, had to run out wide. And this is not the first time we've seen these kind of manoeuvres either. Think back to 2021 with Max Verstappen in Sao Paulo going up against Lewis Hamilton in turn 4,
Yep.
forcing him well off wide. Where do you go? What are you supposed to do when you're the attacking driver? If we punish coming back onto the track, having been forced off it, we're not going to get any more racing.
Yeah, I agree, but we're not punishing coming back onto the track. We're punishing overtaking off the track. And I think, look, I agree with you. The only reason he was out there was because he was kind of shoved off. That's a sort of subjective one. You could argue it both ways because he was behind at the apex when he went into the corner. Yes, Max could have maybe given him a little bit more space, but it was close. But off the track, he overtook him, and you can't do it.
So what was the difference then between this incident and then George Russell at the end of the Lombard straight going up against Valtteri Bottas in the Sauber? Russell got a 5-second penalty for forcing another driver off the track.
Yeah.
Bottas was forced out wide.
Correct.
What's the difference?
The difference is that George Russell was the attacker, the aggressor on that move. He was going down the inside, making the overtake, and in doing so, in overtaking, he pushed the other driver, Valtteri Bottas, off the racetrack. In the Max Verstappen-Lando Norris incident, it was Lando who was trying to do the overtake, and he did that around the outside off the track. So it was it's the aggressor, I think, that often has to find... make sure you're well within the regulations, and I think it was a fair penalty.
Look, I do sort of agree with you. I'm just trying to ruffle your feathers, Mark. But the other thing that would just stop all of this completely, at not only Austin, but at tracks, like I said, like at Interlagos. We saw it in Austria as well earlier in the year between Verstappen and Leclerc and Norris as well in their fight. Why is there such a huge expanse of runoff area that is kind of just encouraging drivers to go out there?
Welcome to the world of MotoGP tracks. All of them have had MotoGP and bikes there where they have to have that wide runoff, and there isn't the possibility of just shutting that runoff down. So they have to have it for the bikes. They don't want it for the cars, but they have to find some happy medium. And I think that's and certainly speaking to Max and listening to other people, that's the consequence. That's what you get. And I think Max has been quite clever in using that again to his advantage.
Formula One has all the money in the world. Surely there is some sort of process where gravel can be implemented and taken away depending on what series is at the track. I completely get the MotoGP point. It is absolutely valid, and that has to be the way. It's incredibly dangerous, and they have to have that much runoff area when the riders fall off the bike. But when Formula One comes to town, we've got to be able to act on these kind of things. This is not the first time we've talked about this. It won't be the last. We're talking about it because it had a major result on the overall podium, but also on the fight for the title. Yeah. As a result, Lando Norris loses ground in the Drivers' Championship. It's had a direct effect on the racing action in the overall World Championship, because you're almost invited, not only if you're Lando Norris, you're invited to go off the track, but if you're Max Verstappen, you are invited to let the steering wheel just go out slightly and force your defender behind you off the road. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place on this one.
I kind of agree. It feels like there must be a technological solution that we can implement here. Whether it's we've tried these little thin gravel traps, haven't we, on the exit corners before the curbs. That feels like a decent solution. But just to quickly finish off on the Max versus Lando point, the argument that McLaren and McLaren fans, I'm sure, will throw at this is, what do you do when you're racing Max Verstappen? How do you get past a Max Verstappen? Unless you've got a car that's so quick you can just breeze past him on a straight, can you fight him fairly? That will be the argument. I actually think today was a relatively fair fight with a great battle, great entertainment, but that, I think, will be the argument from that side of the camp.
Certainly, just speaking to McLaren, they won't go on the record. Zach Brown has left already, the boss, so they're not prepared to speak, but they have spoken to the written media. Andrew Benson was, of course, there, taking the notes. You'll read it on the BBC Sport website. But it comes down for them to consistency with the decisions that are made by the stewards. And the FIA stewards, I've spoken to them, and they say, well, we're just following the letter of the law. That's all we can do. What's written is signed off by the drivers and the teams, and we go forward. Let's have a listen to what George Russell had to say. Remember, he finished sixth, but he is actually the chairman of the GPDA, which is the union, unofficial union, that the drivers are all signed up to. This is what he had to say.
I think the stewards have a very difficult job because the regulations are so large. Their job is to, make a decision based on the letter of the law. But sometimes when you're watching things in slow motion or frame by frame, it doesn't give you the full picture. But if the regulation says one thing, the stewards have to follow what the regulation says, even if common sense says otherwise. So I don't know how we move forward from this. It's obviously not ideal for us drivers. It's not ideal for the stewards as well. I'm sure they're not enjoying the challenge as well. So yeah, that's probably my sampling.
Will you have to speak to them then?
Well, I've yet to. I've been hearing about all of these decisions. I've yet to see any of them because I've come straight from the car. I had a quick ice bath, and then I'm talking to you now, so I need to
I thought you smelled delightful, that's right.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's me.
Oh, sorry. Well, of course it is. So that's George Russell and his opinion on this. Should the team have said, give the place back, and then he would have had another 4 or 5 laps to go again?
It was a really close one, There's only 4 laps to go to the end of the Grand Prix when this happened. You can absolutely say, look, with hindsight, you can say, yes, there was a very high risk. He was going to get a penalty. So therefore, he should have given the place back, had another opportunity to fight him. But the flip side of that is, if you do get a penalty, it's likely to be a 5-second penalty. And with 4 laps to go, and it almost worked, by the way, he could have had an opportunity to try and extend the 5-second lead. I think it got to over 4 seconds. And Max came up against traffic on his final lap. It was very close to even having the 5-second penalty and it not ruining his day.
In Lando's defence, I suppose, when you're also being encouraged by your engineer on the team radio to go, don't worry, no, do not give the position back. We know what you did. We've heard other engineers throughout the weekend saying to their drivers, give back the position, give it back. And ultimately, when you're kind of being instructed and you're positioned that way on the radio by those who can see more data than you can, you've got to trust in your team at that point. And I wonder if Norris clearly had more life in the tyres at the end of that race. He had a bit more pace because you could tell at the way he managed to pull away from Verstappen at the end. If he had one more lap, might well have found another second and it wouldn't have affected the result. But I just think he knew that if he let Verstappen back through, it took him everything to pass him in the first place. Overtaking is possible here, but he was in the Delta window in the DRS section point for lap after lap after lap, and Verstappen is a brilliant driver, obviously, but he was putting that Red Bull in every possible position to keep Lando Norris behind, and it worked. And ultimately, I think Norris just felt that, well, I've got to do it now, or it's never.
You might be able to hear the tyres being let down at the McLaren garage, the hydraulics and all the pumps that they use. And there's a picture of Lando Norris on the side of the wall as they go into the garage. And he looks kind of dapper there, like he's looking over the back of his shoulder, doing up his race suit. But is the title challenge still there for Norris? Do you think there's a 57-point gap now after these 2 races that have taken place here in Austin? Is it still game on?
See, I don't think too much has changed. The only thing that's actually changed for me is got one less opportunity to do it, because I've always thought for a while that this is going to take something quite dramatic if Lando's going to overturn what's a substantial lead. I think trying to eke that out over a number of races by a few points here and a few points there, that's a really tall order. He needs something major to happen, like a DNF from Max Verstappen, like a real disastrous race, a compromise race. It could still happen. There are 5 Grand Prix left, including 2 sprints. There is a lot of racing still to happen, and anything can happen in Formula One. We know that all too well.
You're absolutely right. He needs Verstappen to have a non-score, essentially, to really eat in. I do think the battle is still on, and I think, really, McLaren will be pleased because Verstappen didn't win this one.
Yeah.
That went to Ferrari. And right now we're seeing up and down the grid, these cars are on such a knife edge. The competitive order is almost slightly tweaked every single round we go to. 5 races left of the year. We've got very different tracks coming up.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you right now who's going to be strong. Coming into this weekend, we'll come on to them, but looking at Mercedes, what on earth happened to their weekend? So up and down, and ultimately very much down come the end of Sunday today. So I think they will take some solace in that. The fact that, yes, Red Bull have seemingly found some more pace again, but they weren't there to win it. Verstappen wasn't in the hunt for the win today, and he would have been 3rd or 4th on the road, and McLaren expected that was kind of where their pace was as well. So that's the one kind of silver lining for McLaren and Lando Norris, is that Verstappen did not win.
I know we've spoken about it a bit already, but I am so pumped up for these last 5 races, because there's the Constructors' Championship on the line, there's the Drivers' title still up for grabs, and it's not often that we get this situation coming into the last few races. This is why everyone says we're in a great period for Formula One. It's vintage.
Yeah, and even better than that, let's look at today's race. I thought there was some fantastic racing all the way through the field. The battle that we keep talking about between Max and Lando was wonderful at times, but all the way back, right to the very back of the grid, there were drivers, Williams versus Aston Martins, there were Alpines getting involved, people going wheel to wheel all throughout the field. Formula One is in a great place right now, and even the best bit of all of this is that nothing much should change between now and next year, so we should get another 12 months of this as well. It's wonderful.
I know my producer is going to go crazy with me saying this, but I have to make an honourable mention for Liam Lawson.
Not Kevin Magnussen?
No, that was yesterday. That's okay. Today it is Lawson. He's trying out. He knows he's trying out for a Red Bull seat, whether it's at RB or next to Max Verstappen next year. And he finished 9th. He started last because he had engine penalties from here to probably Mexico. And I just thought this weekend he's shown what he can do. And he's only got 5 races now to secure that seat, a seat. And he is doing a really good job.
Look, he carries on like this. It's a no-brainer. He'll be on the grid next year for the full season.
But for who?
Well, that is the question. The bare minimum will be RB. Tsunoda had a bit of a race to forget, but you know what? Those points for Liam Lawson, so crucial, because in the Constructors' Championship, that fight for 6th is so close. Hülkenberg managed to get some good points for Haas. Ultimately didn't pan out for Magnussen today, but Haas extends slightly, 38 points. There's only 2 points between them and RB, which is literally the 2 points that Lawson scored today. So how crucial is that going to be? And it's going to run and run and run to the end of the season. So the other factor as well to make note is just there was a bit of fastest lap fun right at the end. Shenanigans.
Skullduggery.
Because while we're on these drivers, Franco Colapinto finished in the top 10. He was having a brilliant run of it. Again, the Argentinian driver in the points. He would have got an extra one for the fastest lap, but Esteban Ocon nicked that away, and that's because Williams are only a few points ahead of Alpine. So Alpine just trying to deprive Williams of that extra bonus point. So Lando Norris and Max Verstappen's great, but the battle for 6th, 7th and 8th is really hotting up.
Well, the fastest lap point's been a big talking point recently. They're getting rid of it next year, aren't they? And do you know what? The other part of that little group at the back of the top 10, the Colapinto, George Russell as well, decent result from the starting of the pit lane with him. It was a kind of justification of starting the race on that alternate strategy. Those are the drivers that started on the hard compound tyre, where pretty much everyone else began on the medium and then switched for their one stop onto a hard compound tyre. It seemed like starting on the hard tyre actually was possibly a better overall strategy, because all of those guys made considerable ground through the field, and scoring points was wonderful justification for that.
Absolutely. Right. I need your driver of the day. I do not know where this is going. Harry, can we start with you, please?
Driver of the day. No, yeah, it's not a slam dunk, is it?
No.
I think
Is it?
Or is it? Yeah, I think you have to go with Charles Leclerc. Faultless and manage the pace. Yeah, Charles Leclerc.
I won. I mean, it's difficult not to give it to Charles Leclerc, but I don't want to say he had it easy. He didn't, but he drove a faultless race. But I think there were some great drivers further down that battled for it, and I think the likes of Lawson and even Colapinto to score a point from where he did. I mean, I could even give it to George Russell. This is actually really difficult, isn't it? George Russell started from the pit lane and ended up, where was he, 6th, 5th in the end? 6th.
Yeah.
But he crashed in qualifying.
But what a wonderful... And he got a 5-second penalty during that race, and he still finished up there. So, yeah, there you go. I'll give it to George Russell.
Hulkenberg 8th, that was a good result.
Some solace for a disastrous weekend for Mercedes. I'll give it to George Russell.
Oh, that's who I was thinking of going for. And I can't do the same as you, so I will go. And again, my producer will get very cross with me. I'll go for Liam Lawson, because I thought first race back, big shoes to fill. I mean, Daniel Ricciardo has literally owned this paddock, it feels like, for years. He even came in here on a horse one year.
That's true.
So you have Lawson filling those boots, and actually he did such a good job.
He's also sparked a rivalry with Fernando Alonso straight away. Those two are not best friends right now.
Can you imagine the Netflix show is going to have a field day with that, isn't it? That's going to be a great one.
Who is this young buck?
Yeah.
Well, he's proven to be rather good.
Hasn't he just? Right, the pack-up is on. There's a whole pile here of rucksacks that are belonging to Red Bull. They're being loaded into the freight trucks. The circus moves on to Mexico in just 1 week's time. What will happen there? Goodness knows. The story of F1 just keeps on giving. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to the team. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.